families. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Aloha, and welcome to Stargate to Cosmos. I'm your host, Janet Care Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin, and our producer is Thomas Becker. And we're on Revolution Radio, Studio B. And today we have our special guest, Glenn Bogue, and we do our annual Christmas show. We talk about Jesus, the Anunnaki. So, we've got a number of topics here. I have a show page put up on aquarianradio.com. Please go there and check it out. We've got a number of topics and links to Glenn's 5 books, the 5 books of Isis series. And we're talking about the connection with the Anunnaki. So, Sasha, do you want to say something before we bring Glenn on?
This is really exciting stuff because I've been immersing myself in this for a long time, and Glenn has come up with evidence for what it has to be a logical conclusion about Enki and how he, for a really long time, and gets identified with successive beneficent helpers of humanity, and he'll tell you all about it.
Hi, Glenn. Welcome back to the show.
Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to have you here. So you're up north in Ottawa, and is it snowing? Is it cold?
A bit of snow. The driveway is a skating rink, so it's not a lot of snow yet, but it's cold. It's about 10 below 0 Celsius.
Oh, God.
Oh my goodness! Oh, Celsius. Okay.
I don't know how humans got this far north.
I come south. My lad, come south. Anyway, you are where you are. That's fine. I'm sure it's lovely there too. Everything has its blessings and curses. So it's been a while since we talked, and you've written a 5th book in the Books of Isis series. Tell us about your latest book and your latest research. And have you traveled again? When's the last time you traveled?
Yes. The 5th book is out, but may not be fully out because there's a few problems with the images. And some of those images are camera shots of actual statues, etc., in Europe. They were taken on a trip back in 2011. And in the fall of this last year, we took an extended trip to Jerusalem and to Ethiopia and to South Africa. And it was more to go to this 8-person summit in South Africa with a man who had come from Hawaii. And he had done several sacred ceremonies in Hawaii, LA, and New York, and then went back to meet us in South Africa. His name is Zingdad, and he is he's the channel of the original being that came from the Lyra star system to the Earth many, many, many millennia ago.
From which star system?
The Lyra star system. Lyra, Lyra. Yeah, the Lyra star system. And what he said was that Lyra exploded. We were 8 nights by a campfire, and that Lyra exploded, and people got the hell out of Dodge, and some went to Sirius and joined in with the Anunnaki, etc., over many millennia. Some went to the Orion system and did banking, and then eventually those 2 influences in the Pleiades were also involved, and those 3 basic with Draco, those 4 kind of fingers ended up heading toward the Earth. But the Lyrans were here first as a paradise, and then this is millions of years of history. And so that was the end run. But the second stop was in Ethiopia. We went to the National Museum there, where Daltu Man is there, and the bones of Lucy are there, 4 million BC. And the curator saw we knew what we were talking about, and took us aside and gave us a personal tour. And the calendar there in the museum said, this is last fall, right? That it's October 2011. And I said, Chief, you want to roll the calendar a little bit. You're a little bit behind there. And he said to me that the Ethiopians are very proud, careful keepers of time. There's no mistake. Pope Gregory, I'm Catholic, so I can say this, lied to us on the calendar. They're alleging it's only, right now, December 10, 2012.
So we're coming up on 12/1/12.
Yes.
December 21st, 2012 is supposed to be the
is right ahead of us, 11 days ahead of us. And in 2020, the prediction, this is part of Book 5, which is about banking, is that the whole fiat currency crap is about to collapse. And anybody can go on the internet and Google, just Google economic collapse in the United States, and you can pick up videos, left, right, and center of knowledgeable people. Chris HeZeus, I've been following lately. He's the Pulitzer Prize winner from Harvard. And boy, he is right on point with his predictions. So
how do they know it's going to collapse on a certain date?
It's doomed, but how about the certain day? Yeah.
We don't know how fast it's going to fall. 2008 came in a hurry. I was in a dinner with my children, who were just young kids at the time. They were 3 to 12, and if you would have told me that you would see George W. Bush come on the television and tell the American people that the world economy is going to collapse, not in 2030 or 40, it's going to collapse in 72 hours. Unless they got the bailout. It was quite a stunning moment that people kind of, I think, went into shock and couldn't quite comprehend, because they don't realize that the fiat currency is a series of financial institutions that are in contracts, one after the other, coming out of Basel, Switzerland, and it goes, or London, England, pick your starting point, the Bank of London, and it goes all around the world in this long series of cards. And then when you tip the cards, the whole thing, the whole deck just collapses. And so that's what happened in 2008. They couldn't get the stock market to stop falling. And one of the gals who was brought to South Africa, to the campfire, was the computer scientist that stopped the fall. It took her like 60 days to stop the stock market from falling, or the whole card system would have come down. So the point of Book 5 is to wake up people worldwide that you have been robbed. And one book that's very popular now is a book called Capital. It was written in 2013, but it's making the rounds more and more these days, because the wealthiest 8 families, or top 1%, are now making money at 6% a year, doing nothing but renting out their properties. They're called the rentiers. And the rest of the countries all over the world are only making a GDP increase of 2%, sometimes 3%. So the rest of the world working, 90% of the people working as hard as they can, 6 days a week usually, can only produce 2%, when the rich people, the richest 1%, are making money at 6%, triple the amount, by doing nothing but hold the real estate. So the whole thing's upside down. So the point of Book 5 was to educate people on this. And I have become not a Canadian lawyer. I've now moved on to become an Indigenous lawyer. I wear both hats. And the Indigenous people have the solution for the world.
Which is?
The solution is to put a lien. If you know Anna von Reitz, the judge from Hawaii. Do you know Anna von Reitz?
No.
Who?
R-E-I-T-Z. Anna von, V-O-N-R-E-I-T-Z or Z. And Anna von Reitz is a constitutional judge, is the best way to put her, living in Alaska. And she has shown that the documents that should be in Washington, D.C. in the Library of Congress are not there. And we're referring to the Revolutionary War documents and the peace treaties around that time of what went on in 1776 and in 1783 at the Treaty of Paris. So she's gone through all that. What she's done, she's put a lien on all of the assets of the United States on behalf of the people. And so when you put a lien on something, let's use an example of a ship. If I worked on a Carnival cruise ship and I was making beds and I didn't get paid, I can go down and file a complaint against the ship, and it cannot leave the port until that claim is heard by a judge and I am paid or the hearing is resolved. And so they would have the hearings in the old days. They would have them right on the docks so the ship could get on its way. So that's the value of a lien.
Is there any limit on how long? Is there a limit on how long you can? It's unlimited forever. Okay, gotcha.
That's correct. Until the issue is resolved. So what Judge Wright has done, Von Reitz has done, she's liened the assets of North America, and now they can't move until this issue hits a court of law. Wow. And so our indigenous people here in Canada have filed for suit at the Knights Templar Court. It's in the Netherlands. People have always heard about The Hague, because The Hague is where you go if you're a corporate government. But if you're a person, like Sasha and Janet, if you're a person and you want to make a claim in the Netherlands, you go to what's called the Knights Templar Court of the people, not the corporation. And so we filed a lawsuit there in December of 2018, and now we're working our way through the Canadian court system to gather our evidence against the Corporation of Canada and bring them to the World Court to say the people own the land of Hawaii, Australia, North America, Alaska. The people own that landmass, and they have the right to lien the land and then to open a bank account, guys, on your telephone. We have technology now to open a bank on your phone, and if Canada's worth $35 trillion in natural resources, and there's 35 trillion people. So every man, woman, and child in Canada is worth $1 million. And we're going to put that $1 million into your bank on your phone.
Wow. Why, thank you.
Well, you're not in Canada, honey.
Oh.
Well, we'll adopt you. You made it to Brantford, Ontario. That qualifies. No, it's like I can't do the math in the United States because I'm in Canada now, but I imagine it's a very similar amount. Well, actually, it's not a similar amount because the U.S. Canada is the richest natural resources in the world, in the free world. It's the whisker behind Saudi Arabia, and China leads the way. So of the free world, we're number one, and the U.S. is number 4. You have 10 times the people. But what people don't realize is that in order to run a debt-based system, since Richard Nixon got rid of gold, what they did was since FDR actually, in 1933, they took all the gold and they registered your birth bond at Chase Manhattan Bank in New York at something called the Deposit Trust Corporation. And all the retirement accounts, every asset in the U.S. is registered under Chase Manhattan Bank at 55 Water Street. But that bond that your parents signed you up for, and in order to borrow money from European bankers, we had to bond our labor. That's a birth certificate. You get a certificate of the birth bond. It's written on Treasury paper, and on that bond, they put $2 billion, Janet, into your account in New York, even though, let's say, you're born in Hawaii. They put $2 billion into your account at Chase Manhattan Bank. And they've been using that money to lend out to all people all over the world. That's your money. And you don't have a mechanism to claim it. So right now, if you're in your 60s...
Wait a minute. How can they make Janet obligate Janet? How can parents do that for somebody who isn't of the age of consent?
That's a very good point. That's why you're a UCLA PhD. Because it's not about consent. But until you know the argument, once you realize that Janet didn't give consent at 18 years old, but then you've got to go into their court system in New York, at the UN, or what do you want to call the court system that's in New York or out of Washington or out of London, whatever court system is there, the international court. You're in their court. You're in the United Nations court of the Vatican, and you can sometimes win. But in this case, the judge swears allegiance not to the people, but to the corporate government of Washington, D.C. And so you're challenging their money source. So you might win the argument, but you can go in now and say, I didn't give informed consent. But do you want to consent? Here's the problem people don't understand about money is that the bank, when you put $20 American into a bank, the bank owns you've lent $20 of your labor to the bank. It's a loan from Janet to the bank. That $20 bill is a security. It's a note. It's not gold and silver. And she's lent it to them, and they've gone into her account. If they give her a mortgage for $400,000, they then go into her $2 billion account, and they lend back the $400 from her account. She's borrowed back her own money, and she's agreed to pay them, 2.5% or something to handle the transaction. But then they take that part of that $2 billion, and they lend it out to other borrowers in Tanzania and Australia and Belgium. They lend it out 10 times. They don't tell Janet, and they don't share it with Janet. They agree to pay Janet. She puts her $20 in, and she gets 0.1% interest. Meanwhile, they've made 10 times the money on her $2 billion account. So I now have my social insurance number in Canada, my social security number in the United States, my passport number, my driver's license number is registered in New York City, and I've got all the companies in my office here that have used my account in New York. And so rather than fight them in their courts, what we're going to do is put a lien on the ship. We're going to put a lien on the Vatican ship that's sitting in New York Harbor, the money ship. And we're going to put a lien on that, and we're going to open an international bank of the people. And the person who's on the Sioux Reserve in Rockcliffe, North Dakota, where there's the poorest county in the whole country, over the pipeline problem that we had when Trump came in, that child there can open an account, and she'll have $1 million sitting there for her.
All right.
Until she's age 35. And if she works for 40 hours a week from age 16 until 35 to support the older people, her elders, then at 35, she gets a portion of that birth bond in New York. She gets $100 million at age 35.
I like it.
But now Janet and Sasha, who are in their 60s, at 65, we had a judge in New Zealand. I was on the phone with him. He put his social insurance number from New Zealand into the Washington computer at the Treasury office, and his bond as a judge, he was a JP, Justice of the Peace, but he was 65. His bond was worth $200 billion. And he ordered the computer to transfer $10 billion to his account in New Zealand. And when he checked the next day, the account in Washington took the order, like a stock order, and was down at $190 billion. $10 billion was taken and transferred to New Zealand, but it never got to his account. Somebody stole it along the way. But it proves that at 65 years old, you're worth $200 billion. And you go, well, how can that be? That's a lot of money. And I tell people, well, Royal Bank of Canada, it's called the RBC, one of the richest banks in the world, it's now worth $260,000 trillion.
That's amazing.
So I'm gonna say that of the 400 million people on Turtle Island in North America, Canadians and Americans are really brothers and sisters. We're all one race of indigenous people. The 400 million people living here, if I gave them $1 million each, that number is going to be 4 quadrillion. RBC still has 260 quadrillion. 1,000 trillion is a quadrillion. They have 260 units, and we have 40. I think it's 40 is the math. So even if everybody has $1 million in the United States, you're still not near what one bank has, RBC, the Royal Bank of Canada. They're a global enterprise. But you can see now...
Everybody has all that money. Won't there be inflation and the prices will just rise to meet the incomes?
No, because that's not money. Let's keep our terms straight. That's currency that goes from computers. So we're going to move the money from the computer in New York to your cell phone. So you're going to have that amount of money. But the point about inflation comes from compound interest and from lending out 10 times what you have. So if you had $1 million in the bank and you lend out 10 million, or under George W. Bush, they lent out 40 million, and they only had 1 million in there. That's what's causing the prices to go up. And that money goes to a criminal element, and they go and buy international drug trade. And now they're finding in Canada, in our 2 big cities, Toronto and Vancouver, where it's just crazy time to buy a house, people spend 80% of their income on rent. In Toronto and Vancouver. Well, what are they eating? Grass?
Can't live on that. Yeah.
Now you need a credit card. So the credit card company goes to your account in New York and draws out $10,000 and gives the Lessins a $10,000 credit card and charges them 20% for their own money. And the problem is you haven't been taught what money is. Money is gold and silver. So we're going to tie our bank account to gold and silver again, which is under Indigenous Constitution is gold and silver. It's not currency going through computers all around the world as these criminal elements that are doing drugs. And when they trade in the drugs, even marijuana has been illegal in the States. It's coming around now, but that illegal money went into real estate all over the world. London, Paris, Beijing, Hong Kong, Vancouver. After the 99-year lease was over for Hong Kong, they all came to Vancouver. But that's drug money. That's heavily inflated drug money. But once you have gold, once you have the natural assets at 33 trillion, fixed at 33 trillion, and you can't lend any more, Sasha, that's the amount of money you have. The system doesn't have inflation. It's zero inflation. There was no inflation until 1933. There was no inflation when gold was the standard because there was only so much gold. Once FDR took us off the gold standard in 33, we had the Depression, of course. But then the inflation started. So what was $100? So it was $1 in 1933 now cost you $100 100 years later.
Wow.
They've completely destroyed the buying power of the U.S. dollar. So we're going to, in a flip of a switch, turn that around. The wealthiest company in the world is the Mars family, a chocolate bar company. If you imagine this, a chocolate bar company, and they're worth $80 billion. But in our system, the Lessins, whose account has been traded on since they were 16 years old in New York, or since they were babies, actually, for 65 years, they've been trading on you and making money. These big corporations, RBC, has made $267 quadrillion on your birth certificate, on your money, and they owe you that money back. So now we put $200 billion into your account, and now you're wealthier. You're actually wealthier, 2.5 times wealthier than a chocolate bar company, and I think you're worth it.
So what kind of counter arguments do you expect from the lawyers that are representing the banks?
They'll come and call it voodoo economics. They'll do the arguments like in Reagan's time, Reagan and the trickle-down economics. And then they have a whole television shows about trickle-down economics, and they'll give the rich a tax break, and then it'll trickle down to the poor, blah, blah, blah. And whatever that is all an argument for those people who own the land, who say they own the land, right, that they bought from King George, but the people who owned the land were the clan mothers and the indigenous people of North America. That's who owns the land.
Yeah.
So they can't get around the argument that there is no treaty. There's no treaty in Washington, D.C. When the U.S. surrendered, when George III allegedly surrendered after the Revolutionary War, they made a peace treaty in 1783 in Paris. But what George Washington did was send the boys over there, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin, to cut a deal to carve up North America. But there's no treaty with the indigenous people. Right. You have some chiefs making a deal to save their ass, to save their families from being slaughtered. But those were all not one treaty.
So that's always they get a survivor of the defeated people, or maybe one or two of them, to sign off for the whole people, but they have no such authority.
An elected chief in a democracy of 51% dominates the 49%. But in a republic, which Ben Franklin gave them, a republic, Sasha and Janet are born with inalienable rights to the minerals of the land. Those are your minerals. And if they stay in the ground, no one's going to steal them, are they? With a big shovel. And then we just assess the value of the minerals in Canada. It's a smaller country, so it's $33 trillion. And we have 33 trillion people, roughly. That each man, woman, child is worth $1 million. Put it in their account and let them go spend it, and the economy will go crazy. You have lots of orders for yachts and roller skates and whatever you want. But in order to get to the 100 million, you have to pass 3 courses. And we educate people in history, we educate people in a judicial system, what it really means, and we educate people in money and the difference between gold and silver, which has for millennia been the money supply, and fiat currency, which has always crashed badly. And now it's going to crash again next year.
In every country, they go through the crash of their fiat money. It's happened again and again, country after country.
Yeah, I think the guy started. He was hired. I saw a video the other day by a guy named McDonald. He's really good. And this guy was hired to go through all the currencies that crashed, and he got to the letter A, and all the currencies named A, and he got through those. And then he got through halfway through B, the letter B currencies, and he had 600 currencies, Sasha, that had crashed and burned. He went back to his boss and said, "You're wasting your money here." They've all crashed and burned. So that's Rome. When Rome started to cut the gold coins, remember, they melted them down, and they began to take them and put nickel in them and other stuff, and debase the currency, and that was really the end of the Roman Empire. It took them from like 70 AD till 491 to fall down. But in that period, they had military dictatorships to keep them going. But it finally fell down in 491 when the Germans came in. The Germanic tribes took over.
Yeah.
So not much of this has to do with Jesus. Not much has to do with Jesus yet. But that's book 5 kind of focuses on that kind of thing. But now around the world, you're getting the indigenous people revival. We're talking to Russians in Russia. Most interestingly, we're talking to the Basque people. We're about to start talking to the Basque people. I just started doing Basque research, and the Basques are the original Phoenicians who went all over the world. And so I'm talking to the chief in L.A., and he tells me, well, I'm of the Red Dynasty. red is from Nibiru. That much I know. The red, when you see red, the red prophets of the Bible, Adam was red because Adam came from a hybrid from planet X, Nibiru. So he's a red dynasty, and he said the Choctaw language is very similar to the Jewish language. The Cree of northern Canada, they're way in the north. The Cree's been preserved, that language, and those Crees are speaking Hebrew. I had a guy call me 4 years ago and say when his dad saw television for the first time and the little man with the funny hat on, the yarmulke, he asked his grandson, why is that man speaking Cree? He was speaking Hebrew.
Oh, wow.
But the Hebrew is...
I just say,
the Hebrew...
Cat Ballou recognized that in Cat Ballou, they were going around saying Shalom Aleichem to the Indians because they were of the same tribe. And so we got the same story through knowledgeable cinema, which was really telling the truth.
Yeah, because the Basques are known as the Iberians or the Iberi, which has a root in Jew. But the Zionist leaders who are in Jerusalem now, because the most oil in the world they've discovered in the Dead Sea. So Trump moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem to have Exxon control that oil. But that's the Zionist Jews who are making... Those are the Zionist Jews from Russia. Yeah, they're the Khazarian Jews from Russia. Who are behind. Yes, it's the biggest strike, biggest strike of all time is in the Dead... Well, think about it, the Dead Sea, right? All the oil goes to the lowest sea level. So,
sense. Wow.
And that's apparently the gateway between Eurasia and Africa. And so if you're going to box in the Chinese who are expanding into Africa like crazy, you're going to control that area of the world. I don't understand that argument so far. I just read that the other day on a video, etc. So the point is that the Basque people have this ancient language, this bird language, as the Cree do in northern Canada, as the Choctaw do in Oklahoma, and then the Russians are, and all these indigenous people, what used to be a dirty name, almost being a nigger, pretty much. I used that term in court one day, and I did just, don't call me sir. Sir is a military appellation equal to nigger. And she jumped out of the chair, the lawyer, was running around saying, I've never heard such an insult, the N-word being used in the court. I said, yeah, but you don't mind sir. You don't mind insulting me with the word sir, which is a military appellation that you're occupying our land with a British force. so they just can't think fast enough.
What drama.
I know. So, but the indigenous people now are rising back up. So back to Knights Templar, there's a legend in Knights Templar that it's called the Greening of the Vine. And they were arrested and killed in 1307. They were arrested on Black Friday, October 13th. But what lost my train of thought. Greening of the Vine, then is 700 years later. So in 2007 is the beginning of the greening of the vine. And in 2008, the whole house of cards came down. What's that?
What does that mean, the greening of the vine?
The greening of the vine. If you have no fruit on the tree, the fruit will return. Like people don't realize People don't realize carbon dioxide. This myth coming out of Rio by a Canadian communist in the worst sense of the word, Maurice Strong, who was Rockefeller's right-hand man in Canada. He went to Rio and announced the big summit on global warming and blamed carbon dioxide, not realizing that the trees, that's food for the trees. And now the trees are growing back. The greening of the trees is growing back like crazy. There's not enough CO2.
Wow.
But Maurice Strong wanted to tax the carbon. He couldn't get enough tax on a gas tank, on a liter of gas, so they began to tax the carbon emissions of corporations who were minding their own business. So the Earth is trying to regreen itself after we knocked down the Amazon. The Earth now is healing over. It's a lot like when the Pharaohs planet and moon came through the Marianas Trench. You guys know, we've talked this before, and cut the trench up the Pacific. And you guys have told me that you see islands being created in the Pacific around Hawaii.
Absolutely, yes. When I was in Tonga, there was an island that would come up when there was a eruption, a few feet above and then it would sink again as it ground away from rain and sea rise. It's alive here.
It's what?
The Earth is continually giving birth here. It's alive.
Well, think of it this way. It's scabbing over. When you cut your hand, you scab over, and you scab over, and you scab over until the finger's back to the original surface.
Yeah.
So the Pacific Ocean is just from the Marianas Trench where the Nibiru's moon came through and cleaved off the Pacific Ocean crust and made it the asteroid belt. Well, it's just the Earth's trying to heal itself over and become a sphere again. So it's doing it all over the world now. We've wrecked the rainforests and our forests. Canada cuts down its forests at record rates, but they're leading the world, by the way. And the Canadians don't get that money. German logging companies get those monies. The Canadians don't get a dime from it.
Can you stop that?
Well, this is why we put a lien on the forests of Canada, and we're going to enforce that lien at the World Court. And we're going to tell the lawyers, look,
what is the World Court? If you prevail, does the court enforce things by bans and sanctions, or how does this court in the Netherlands enforce anything in Canada?
At the UN, it's part of the UN. The Templar Court is a contract with the UN. Its judgments are enforceable. We'll take back our land from the Queen, and we're going to create this indigenous government where all the people born here have a 1/37 millionth, or in the U.S. they have a 1/330 millionth interest in the natural resources. But most of that wealth that you have as the Lessins is sitting in Chase Manhattan Bank. The resources here are worth $1 million each person in Canada, but my bond in New York is worth today $200 billion, and I want it back. So I can use it for humanitarian purposes.
Yeah.
And we'll go and start building homes that can withstand hurricanes and tornadoes. Because the technology, the indigenous people have that technology now. So when I go to the lawyers, and argue at the World Court, what are you fighting for? I have an account waiting in your cell phone. I can transfer you $200 billion. What are you charging, $600 an hour? I can transfer you $200 billion now. But who wouldn't do that? It's interesting, isn't it?
You had the person try it and it got robbed. Where did it go?
How did that happen? Yeah.
Who stole it?
It can't happen. It's in your phone, and we'll have the best computer technicians in the world protecting that phone. As soon as an account's hacked in, the system shuts down. We don't care because it's all pretend money anyway. It's all pretend currency anyway. It's the only way to get us equal. It's the only way to get us equal. The top 1% have 90% of the wealth of the world, of the fiat wealth. They have 90% of it.
Right.
And the land that they own, but they never own the land because you can't buy the land from the people. You only buy the land from a corporation. I can't buy Hawaii. I'm a steward. So in our Constitution, you swear to be a steward of the land and to love your neighbors as yourself.
Right.
And if you get caught doing that, if you get caught not loving your neighbor and acting in an appropriate manner, you risk being taken to a court of equity and losing your phone account. You could lose the $200 billion and go back to work. Who would do that? Well, you've already got the money. You've already got 100 million or $1 million. At 35, you have $1 million. At 35, you have your 100 million, and it moves up in scale as you get to 65. You've got $200 billion. It's only about changing your scale because, as I said, the big corporations, they already have these amounts, huge amounts of debt. But RBC is a hard concept. RBC's debt, its amount of 267 billion is an amount, quadrillion, is an amount that they owe the Lessin. They borrowed our money and lent it out. They owe us that money. So we're just going to take it back, thank you, and put it in our phones, in our own accounts.
How do I do that?
Well,
if they have to prevail in court first.
You asked what happened in the last year. This has only happened in the last 2 weeks. We've been focusing on this money system for the last 2 weeks. It's kind of like an energy thing around the planet. Like we're meeting people all of a sudden who have the exact skills that we need to do this. That was a phone call today for an hour with international commercial types. And they have their own teams of 400 and 500 people who are sick and tired of this. Wow. They're sick and tired of working for corporations and working themselves to the bones. I mean, you spend 40 hours a week in the best times of the day during the day, right? Working. Right. And you don't see the sun. So you end up sick.
Slavery.
Huh? What's that?
It's the slave system.
That's right.
We've been tricked into slavery.
Yeah, Michael Tellinger's book, Slave Species. But the whole thing's coming to a head now that you realize it's 2012, and the question is, and the part of the show is, Enki and Jesus is this person who I'm claiming is the same person, because only Enki and only Jesus, not his real name, by the way, that's his royal title. His real name is Enki, but they're both known as the Son of Man. And they're the only two figures in history who make the claim to be the Son of Man. So now the claim is that he is under Mount Shasta, California. He's in the U.S.
And in the stories of Jesus, he overthrew the banking system.
There's money changers. That's right. Look at you, Dr. Lessin. Look at you, man. And I didn't really realize that. I use the term every now and then, money changers, but I didn't realize that he's there in Mount Shasta with the Talos, underneath Mount Shasta. The survivors from Lemuria, your brothers from the Pacific Ocean are there in under Mount Shasta. And that's where my daughter studies. My third daughter studies there. She's going around the world now at sacred sites, but she studied there for 4 years. And in her last lesson, he told her, "Let's talk about Nibiru." My dad taught me that 20 years ago. Can I get my money back?
Well, there's a under Shasta. There's an like a rail system. It's not a rail. It's like a high-speed transport system that's ancient, and it goes all the way around the earth. So he's not limited to being in Shasta. He can be wherever he wants to be.
Yeah, but
that's why the show is so great.
Neil Freer had talked to him when he was in. That's the area where many people have talked to him directly.
Talk to Enki.
Yeah, he gave Neil Freer a ride in his aircraft, and when Neil was just 12, and told him he was going, what his job was to back up Sitchin, and he clued him in what he was going to be doing.
Yeah, Neil passed a few years ago, but he froze his head. And he told him he gets revived.
But did he say that the Enki looked like Jesus?
Well, he said he had, when he saw him, he had those Sumerian beards where they're very neat.
Yes.
Those great big, almost like curly-cued beards that are almost like they were permed or something, but that's how they come out.
Oh, Dr. Lessin, that's the picture I have of Jesus and Zeus. There's a bust of Zeus in Greece, who I'm saying is Enki Jesus. And that bust there is exactly what you're saying. It's in my book 4 or 5. It's astounding.
Yeah, and
I found this show astounding.
One of the problems is, like, fathers look like sons, and sometimes Marduk, Enki's son, is who's being depicted as Zeus. You can see there's different depictions. Because basically, when the Minoans and Phrygians were overcome by the Mycenaeans, who were Marduk's dudes.
So now we're back to the issue of Enki's son being the rightful ruler of the world, allegedly.
Yeah, they're both
right,
they're both fighting. Yeah, exactly.
And
that's who the.
Well, what the fellow told us.
Go ahead, Glenn.
The Lyran at the campsite, the 8 nights we spent in South Africa by that fire, he told us that, and if you look up Zingdad and go through his stuff, you'll see that the red vampire, he called them, guys, he all of a sudden died. Now, I'm associating the red vampire with Enlil, who I've always alleged is living in Germany. That's why George I's line, the Saxo-Coburg Hanover group, is so powerful. And now the German bank, once again, you can imagine the German bank after World War II being destroyed, is now the strongest bank in Europe, and one of the strongest, of course, in the world. And so suddenly, the guy calling the shots might be dead, whoever the red vampire is. And
wow.
So I think it's Yahweh, and now the whole thing is going to start shaking because these guys are robots. They just get marching orders. If you work for Exxon, you go every year to Jekyll Island in Georgia, and you get your marching orders for that year for Standard Oil. And you just go follow your orders, right? Well, these people are following orders for so long, they can't think properly, creatively. So now they don't know this is why I say this is going to come down. The whole thing's going to come down because no one's got the right marching orders. He kept it all to himself because he wouldn't share the knowledge or wouldn't teach a student or an apprentice how his system worked. Fear of being taken over. So that's the theory. Now, is that going to happen? I don't know. But if it does, with the top 1% earning money at 6%, and all the countries working as hard as they can 6 days a week, only making 2% growth, they're tripling our output. We're cooked under the current system.
Yeah.
So whether he's dead or not, if he's dead, it makes it easier for us. But what we're seeing is that the Indigenous, and for some reason in Canada, Indigenous, it's gone crazy. It's on the news. It's in the newspaper. They're only 4% of the population. There's this subconscious revival.
The thing is that many people in America, the Trumpists are on the verge of a civil war, and they aim to use force of arms. And if the president declares that a national emergency or martial law for some pretext or natural thing that he seizes upon, then we are just split. We don't, and the United States is in great jeopardy of going to civil war, right? Very soon.
Yeah, there was a guy named John DeCamp. John DeCamp was a lawyer in Nebraska, and he was involved in the Columbine shooting. He investigated that for the grand jury, by the way. And
wow.
He was involved he investigated the Oklahoma City bombing, and he was brought in the Boys Town orphans that were taken to George Bush's White House for parties.
Whoa.
And he said, all these kids are coming in my office saying I was flown to Washington. And he said, well, they can't all be lying. And he began to do his homework. So this is like in the 80s. And so we know more now. But in 1989, there's a New York, a Washington Times front page. I lived in Philadelphia at the time. I remember it. It said, call boys in the White House. I thought they were 21-year-old, pages or 18-year-old pages. homosexual activity, which I don't care about. But no, they were 14-year-old boys being brought in. The guy who sang the national anthem in the 1988 Republican convention, his name is Larry King. He's a black fellow, a banker from Lincoln, Nebraska, with a great voice. He was the ringleader of the pedophile scandal for Ronald Reagan and for George H.W. Bush.
Wow.
And he was the fall guy. He went to jail, but the rest of them just disappeared in that period. So, but he said, never mind the pedophile. His close friend was William Colby, who was the head of the CIA for 25 years. William Colby brought down Russia, if you could say something brought down Russia. He was in that period up to 1989, and he said, no, it's not the pedophile scandal in Hollywood or Boys Town Orphanage in Lincoln, Nebraska, which, by the way, is where Warren Buffett comes out of, and Dick Cheney. They come out of a railroad board of directors there. That's another story. But William Colby, the head of the CIA, told this lawyer, the problem is the American people are armed to the teeth in their basements, and they're itching for it. And now you've got the military coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq, and then they've armed the sheriffs with all these heavy equipment and heavy gunpowder, and they've got the AK-47s in the basement, and you better stay home that night.
They've trained all the police to use military weapons and vehicles. The FEMA camps are ready for dissenters. It's a very serious constitutional crisis that we and the English are moving toward right now.
Wow.
So once you realize that the Constitution, it originated in with the Iroquois. The Iroquois gave their Constitution to George Washington. He promptly turned around and began killing them to get their land in Ohio that the British took. The British got the land in Ohio. So George wasn't happy with the 13 colonies. Then you have the Indian land all the way from Quebec all the way down to Louisiana where the French were. And then to the west of that, you have an area, Ohio, which the British got under the Treaty of Paris. And so the first Treaty of Paris, 1763. But then 10 years later, King George took Quebec under the Quebec Act, 1774. And that's what caused the Revolutionary War 2 years later. George Washington declared war on the British in Quebec. So the Quebecers...
He got his Constitution from the Iroquois?
He got it from the Iroquois. Just Google New York Times, 1986 article, or 87. Just Google the New York Times. The U.S. Constitution was given by the Iroquois Confederacy of 6 nations. And it was love the earth, be a steward of the land, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so
he came up and settled the Americas, so
he was known as the peacemaker among
so that
the
was
Iroquois.
Possibly,
they recognized him.
Document that came from Yankee originally, or an idea.
Yeah, you always come across that. It's interesting you say that because in my travels here, now you wouldn't know that, but my travels here, when you meet the chiefs, they talk about the peacemaker.
Right.
So
what they
it
say
was
is Hiawatha was all the Iroquois used to fight one another, and Hiawatha was the war chief, and a probably Nima, a sacred woman, told him Hiawatha to talk to the peacemaker, and that was Enki. And then the Iroquois came together, and the grandmothers organized them. But that's the story they tell.
The music's going to come any second now. Just to give you a heads up. So remember where we are so we can come back in the commercial break.
The League of the Hosowani.
This is really, really so timely, guys, as usual. I don't know how you guys do this, but you do it. Yeah, we'll come back to the Constitution.
Okay.
Okay, we get back from our break. We'll go back to the Constitutions. Okay, the music should be here any second now, and we'll be back in 5 minutes after our commercial break, and we're talking to Glenn Bogue on Stargate to the Cosmos. Okay, are we on break now? Not sure what's going on. Oh, okay. It's 56 according to my computer clock. So, already. Anyway, we're having a fascinating conversation about everything.
We're still in the air, right?
Are we still in the air? There we go. There's the music. Okay. We'll see you in 5 minutes. Hello, everybody. We have that feedback again. Welcome back, Stargate Cosmos. And I'm your host, Janet Kerr Lessin. And my co-host is Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin. And we are on Revolution Radio, Studio B, with our producer, Thomas Becker, also known as a Mad Painter. And our guest today is Glenn Bogue. But before we get back to our guest and our very super interesting show, I'd like to remind everybody to go over to that donation button on revolution.radio. And please make your donation this week. Maybe you want to start doing a monthly donation. Anything you donate, we greatly appreciate it. And we're very grateful. You're helping us stay on air and bring these wonderful shows and help us to improve our system. Thank you so much. So, Sasha, you're back.
Okay, yeah. So we've come to the thing of huge interest to me and to lots of people is the scientists who gave us our existence as a subspecies, one and the same, Enki, Lucifer, Jesus, and did he marry Nimma, who's married, who's been appearing and helping humanity for a long time. They both are here for the Aquarian Age, and it may really be beginning on December 21st, 2012, which is just now arriving in a few days. That's where we got at the break.
Right. Yeah, I want to know what else is supposed to happen on December 12th, 2012. I haven't thought about that in years. So back to you, Glenn. What do we need to finish up about? I mean, I want how much? $200 billion. How can we expedite
Well, I know,
this?
but you have to go through the history course to get the carrot. So what happened in 1777 is that they 14 states united, 13 colonies, and Quebec, or Canada, or the Métis, Canada. They came down from Montreal to Philadelphia, and the 14 became sovereign states. And so in order to disempower them, George Washington, is he wearing a white hat or a black hat? He was killing the Iroquois in Ohio, and then they went and made the treaty in 1783 in Paris, but they didn't take the indigenous people with them to the peace table. They created another war like document, the Treaty of 1783, where they had to pay back to King George III a debt for 100 years. And then they make the Constitution in 1879. But that's 12 years later, because the Constitution really is a document to usurp the wealth of the United States and to eventually control those 14, becoming 50 states. So each state is sovereign in the U.S. until 1871. 100 years later, they can't pay the debt back to George III, the 100-year debt. So now the bankers in New York want their money, and they create the Washington, D.C. Act. And that's really a receivership. It's a corporation receivership under a CEO. And those laws of Washington, D.C. were then flung all over the different states of the United States. So Wyoming is not Wyoming. It became the state of Wyoming Incorporated, a receivership. So they've been stealing the money ever since.
Wow.
For the last 200 years. So now the awakening time of 2012, it's now people to wake up and see what happened. The fledgling United States that had the republic, the greatest republic of all time, was very quickly snuffed out by some of the fathers of Confederation, like George Washington, who worked for the Virginia Company, which is the East India Company, under a different flag. They took down the Dutch flag and they put up the American flag on the same ships.
Wow.
The same thievery, and the victims are the American people and North American people. And not just indigenous people. If I ask people, where they're born, they say Pittsburgh, and I say, well, you're indigenous. No. And I said, well, where were you born? And they said, Pittsburgh. Well, you're indigenous to North America. Well, I never thought of it that way.
Right.
Well, when you tell them they're worth $100 million, they sure come around in a hurry. So all of this is something coming from Germany into the Bank of England. When George I came from Germany onto the throne of London in 1717 or so, he said, talk to me about banking. And that's the Red Dragon Enlil coming with his banking system from Orion, by the way. We said at the start of the show, someone to learn banking in Orion, and then they started to bring this fiat currency across the water, these bills of exchange programs, which aren't based on anything, because the Armenians, I learned last Friday, the Armenians had all the wealth. They were running the ships with no guns on them. The Armenians had had the savvy and had all the wealth, and they were trading fairly with people. But there were no guns on those boats. I couldn't believe it. 1603 was the first time a gun went on a boat when the Portuguese went down and stole the boat. So then you started to arm the boats with cannons. They didn't have it before. It was a peaceful trading community all along the India coastline. It was all just peaceful boats going back and forth, sharing their goods and bartering, and using gold as a barter. My point is, we're going back to that. As the indigenous rise up, as Enki might do his thing in Mount Shasta, we don't know. But it remains to be seen. So going back to the start, to what I said to the questions, the pivotal point is King Solomon. And so they've now found King Solomon's boats in South America. His mines were in the Inca.
Yeah.
So in my books, I go.
We know that the talks specifically went to Tiwanaku, and then that's where he made huge finds of gold, and that's what brought all those miners and engineers with him. And that's where he began his mining operations.
In what year?
This is about 311 BCE. 311. Yes, I know it was before that. It was 3111. Way back. He had come over. First of all, he came over with his uncle to make the alternate spaceport at Tiwanaku with the takeoff in Nazca, and then he started all over. He first went to the Valley of Mexico, brought his technicians there. He found gold in great profusion. Every place where there was not just place for gold, but he was also after copper. There were huge copper finds also, especially in the Great Lake Michigan area.
Right. So my books, in book 4, I go through the fact that King Solomon is Enki. Because at the end of the Bible it says, I was the father and the son of David. Well, David's father was a guy named Jesse, the Serpentine. Not some guy with a beard and a cane running around. He's not a shepherd. King David is the Serpentine king from Memphis. And he sires David, then he marries David's daughter. Because once you realize that King David is a pharaoh, he's not a Jewish king, because they haven't ever found any evidence in Jerusalem whatsoever of a David or Solomon. But a guy named Ralph Ellis found their coffins in an Egyptian burial ground, solid gold, by the way, with Solomon and Solomon and David written on their chest in Egyptian. They opened them up and they're empty. Someone's playing a joke. So Solomon was getting the gold out of the Incas. He taught the Incas how to mine for the gold in Peru. And then he went to South Africa, where Michael Tellinger has found his mines, and he was mining it there. And the Queen of Sheba would bring the gold from South Africa up to Jerusalem, up to the Vatican, where it was taken off the planet to Mars. So the point of that is that there were trade routes between Jerusalem and South America, so that the Knights Templar. I'm jumping ahead to it. That's 1000 BC, but the Knights Templar, when they got trapped in France, they loaded whatever the hell gold onto the boat and headed for North America. In 1307, they landed in Mexico. They landed in Providence, Rhode Island, and they landed in Nova Scotia. And they brought with them, allegedly, the Ark of the Covenant from under King Solomon's temple. Whatever the hell that is. We don't know what that is, but they brought the Ark. That's the legend of the Micmac Nation in Nova Scotia. And now they've moved it.
So some of them also fled to Scotland in trying to save Scotland from the English too.
Yes, that whole Jacobin Stuart revolt up there, but that's also Sinclair, who also came. But they came over in 1362 because there's a stone slab in Minnesota called the Kensington Runestone. And in there, the Templars have carved in the peace treaty of 1362. So they had the first treaty for North America, and they said the copper sheets were just on the beach, and the gold was just lying around. That's how the Incas got so much gold to make. It was lying around the beach. So we'll take this; it's malleable, it's pretty durable, and we'll slam it into the temple. This stuff looks great. That's how much gold there was here. That's what brought the Anunnaki here. So then they began to melt it down into bars when they took it back over to Europe. And when they got caught by the Pope, they shoved it all back on the boats and took it back over to North America. And then when Jacques Cartier in Canada or Cortez in Mexico or Pizarro in South America went after the Inca, Maya, and the indigenous Micmac, when he went after them, the Iroquois had the gold, when he went after them, they had maps. They knew where the gold was.
Right.
Cortez made a beeline for the gold bars of the Knights Templar, because the native North Americans in South America, they had no notion to make gold into bars. They were slapping it off the beach into the temples. Isn't that a crazy story? It's all the Europeans being driven by the Red Dragon and Leo.
So Enlil's the Red Dragon. What
That's
makes you think he's the Red Dragon?
He called them the Red Vampires.
Dragon families, it's on the royal crests, and we had somebody that was trying to sort all that out. And for a while, one of the dragons was talking to us on some of the radio shows, and apparently he did die. So you're saying one of the dragons died, but if he's an Anunnaki, they don't stay dead. They know how to revive the dead. So.
Well, there was a fellow I met here about 2 months ago or 3 months ago, who I used to know 5 years ago, and he heard that it was Marduk who was seen by Michael Lee Hill, who died.
Yeah, that's what Michael Lee Hill said.
He said that Marduk died.
No. What he said is that Marduk was, what Kenny Bradley and others have told us, Marduk was put on trial for the mass murders and genocides that he had been responsible for. And he pleaded that I had to do it. It was part of awakening humanity to the technological ability to have world peace with their computers and so forth because of all the suffering I caused. But I'm truly sorry. I had to do it, and I want to make amends, and I'm going to help Enki, Jesus, and the Anunnaki who have come back and those that stayed. So they said the council decided to put him on probation, and they have this guy with him ready to assassinate him if he does any more atrocities. So that's what we've been thinking of.
Wow, and so he's somewhere around Ohio?
That's where he was saying, yeah. No, it's Seneca. It was upstate New York. It's a name of the place. It's got a very specific town that is the territory of Seneca. And then he went up to New York, and he was taken by a guy named Loki. Michael Hill was taken by Loki to a place called Genie in a Bottle, and he was given some kind of an upgrade, some kind of a implant, something that totally changed his consciousness. And he had several talks with Marduk, who he said was Rift, and Loki was putting his arm around Marduk and saying, "It's okay, listen, you had to do it, and it's going to be okay." That's Michael's story.
Yeah, because we all had to pass lives, honor, and Leo, and the orders of King Hannibal. So Marduk was the one person who rebelled and tried to gain back the throne.
Getting a lot of static. I'm not sure why. Bad. Is there anything we can do about the static? Anyway, keep talking, I guess. Coming from your phone. Okay, we're not sure. All right, well, let's just keep going.
Is that better?
There we go.
Way better.
Yes, not sure what you did, but way better. And if you could speak up a little bit more, I'm having trouble hearing you sometimes. But go ahead, continue.
So where have we gone? So when you go back into history, and you go back into King Solomon.
Disappearing. Go ahead. Say that again.
Yeah, we want to progress in the history.
Let's keep going into history. So, where were we? We were going around a lot, but okay. So he came over to the Americas.
Tracing the fact that
Enki was there when the Constitution was. There's the angel that was on the balcony when they signed the Declaration of Independence, and that's Enki.
The Declaration of Independence. That's right. And then it's suspended 100 years later in 1871. And all we've had since then is a system for a corporate government in Washington. In 1871, we had a corporate government put into Ottawa, Canada, where I live, in 1867. But these were in Canada. It was not a confederation. There was no vote here of the people to confederate the states. It was just a corporate collection agency, and it's run by the IRS and the Canadian Revenue Association agency, out of Delaware and Puerto Rico. It has nothing to do with Canada at all. It's just one big collection agency to take the money back to Europe, to keep the enslavement going. So now it's time to begin to reteach the history of the world.
So a contract that's done in an illegal fashion is invalid.
But who enforces all this? It's all this.
You enforce it, the UN enforces it by sanctions.
We're going to go through there, but the last time we're going to go through to the World Court and sue Canada in the World Court to wake the Canadian people up. Because Canada, there's an author named Naomi Klein who's in L.A., but she's a Canadian. She wrote a book called Shock Doctrine. We've talked about it before on this radio show.
And Naomi Klein? I'm hearing you a little bit. Can you speak up or something? Or
I'll try for the second.
Try saying that.
Is that
again.
better? Is that better?
Yeah.
Yes.
So Naomi Klein, she runs the LEAP, the Leap Foundation in LA. She's a Canadian journalist, wrote the Shock Doctrine, and she said Canada is going to lead the world in Indigenous government. So we're going to sue them with the left hand in the Queen's courts, which in the UN, the Vatican UN court, which will take us into The Hague to show Canadians that we're claiming the land back of Canada at the World Court because there's no contract. The Queen Victoria never signed our Constitution. You have John Hancock and all the signatures on the U.S. Declaration in Washington, right? But our Constitution never seen the light of day because Queen Victoria never signed it. It's stuck somewhere in the Tower of London. No Canadian's ever seen its Constitution signed by the Queen.
Can you demand it as evidence? You want to see it?
We're in 7 superior courts now in Ontario and Quebec, demanding that the Crown start negotiating and produce this document. So with the right hand, we've developed the old equity courts of the King's Conscience in England, but that goes back all the way to Cleopatra in Egypt. The equity courts of conscience. That murder and mayhem and bombs and killing is wrong. Doesn't matter how lawful. I mean, most of the wars lately don't bother to declare war anymore. The president just pushes a button and away they go.
Right.
So we're going to enforce these debts, enforce the banking situation. We're not really banks or financial institutions, but we're going to enforce them in our own courts of equity. In the U.S., some states still have courts of equity, but some don't. Canada doesn't have any courts of equity anymore. They left here in 1880. But we're going to reestablish those courts of equity of conscience, and that's where you'll enforce your $200 billion that was taken from you wrongfully as a child. Sasha. They duped your parents and signed you over to be a debt slave until you're 65.
Wow. Well, I'm 79 now.
You're free, honey.
So you're a little more than $200 billion. So it'll take us about 6 months to get us up and running, I think. But we've had our major meetings and we've got the right team in place.
About 6 months.
Can you hang on, Sasha?
We can all breathe in about 6 months. Woo!
So the other issue to talk about is the fact that the planets are warming up. Uranus and Neptune with this global warming, which I've already discussed, has nothing to do with carbon dioxide, because the trees are eating up like crazy and replenishing the earth with greenery. So what's causing the planet to warm up? Well, now they're saying that Neptune and Uranus are heating up. And
Nemesis.
What's that?
Nemesis, the red dwarf that Nibiru goes around, is getting closer to, and so it's hotter.
Yeah, I mean, the planet.
It says 85% of global warming, according to Andy Lloyd, anyway, is caused by the fact that they're all getting warmer.
They're all getting warmer. And now they're reporting the sun's axis is starting to tilt towards something. Mm-hmm. So I think it's Nibiru. It's the gravitational pull of Nibiru. Yeah. Yes.
Or so Nibiru is primary. That's the other possibility. There's a red dwarf. There's something much bigger than Nibiru that Nibiru rotates around.
Right. Nibiru is a planet, and it rotates around the brown dwarf or the red dwarf.
Yeah, called Nemesis. It doesn't ever go around Solaris. It passes between Mars and Jupiter.
So the new theory is it doesn't go around Sirius A and B and C. It goes around this red dwarf.
Yeah, it was. What they said is basically when Sirius C went nova, that shot Nibiru through the solar system, and where it goes through, it never goes around Solaris. It comes in clockwise, whereas the other planets go anti-clockwise. It passes between Mars and Jupiter and goes on around. And we're not just dealing with Nibiru itself coming through, but 180 degrees from it, always at what's called the Lagrange points, and at 90 degrees, there's also this crap that comes through. And also everything's been changed because of during one of the hits, it went through and it tipped Uranus on its side, and it started going faster. Now, instead of 3,600 years of our years, it's 3,450. So everything's changed. There's a dynamic happening that's making everything hot here. And we don't know what's causing Nemesis to move, but Nemesis is the big thing that's behind Nibiru. And Nibiru's got moons too. It's not just by itself. It's a whole cluster, and you can get the pictures of Nibiru from our cameras that anybody can access at Soho. You can see it. It's the second sun. It's there. You can see it at sundown.
Wow. And you can see the moons of it? It had like 12 moons. They're saying that our moon is really Nibiru's moon. That's why the moon's so big. When they collided, they hit one of our moons hit the Pacific crust, but the force, the Earth's gravity pulled the moon of Nibiru called Kingu. And that's why it's so big. It's out of proportion, right? It can't be pulled out of the Earth. It's out of proportion. It's so big. No,
that's one theory. The other theory that in the CIA we got from Stuart Swerdlow is that the moon, the Dracos who had settled Venus after they blew Maldek, basically placed the moon, which is hollow, and it was full of their beef, which was dinosaurs. And from there, they settled Lemuria. You probably, the fellow you talked to in South Africa probably told you the same tale. But so that's why the Dracos say, you guys landed in Atlantis, but that was way after we had already settled Lemuria, and our dinosaurs had spread all over Urantia, Earth.
So are you saying, to hear that correctly, that the dinosaurs came from somewhere else? Came from Draco?
Absolutely. The Dracos brought them, in the CIA documents anyway. The Dracos, when they were pursuing the fleeing Lyrans, some of the Lyrans had settled on Maldek, which was a planet between Jupiter and Mars. And what happened is the Maldekans saw them coming. Maldekans are Lyrans like us. And they asked for shelter from the Martians. The Martians had underground. They prepared. They had bought some shelter, some thing to protect them somewhat from the coups. But anyway, as the Dracos, who were in this hollowed out death comet, blew up Maldek, and as they passed Mars, it drew off most of the water and the air from Mars, but the people were okay. And then as it passed Earth, which was water vapor covered, and it drew off enough of the water so that Lemuria arose and Atlantic arose, and then this hollowed out thing that the Dracos were riding in, which was full of them and their what they ate, which was the dinosaurs, came to the position of Venus. It melted, the sun melted the snow. The Dracos came to the surface. They had 7 casts. They made 7 domed cities, and they placed the hollow moon exactly where it is so that it would be perfect to settle Lemuria, which they did, and they brought their dinosaurs, which later on the Atlanteans just killed them off with their laser weapon. The dinosaurs. At least that's the account that we get from Stewart. And it goes on with the Council of Hatona in Andromeda. Basically, there's a lot of ETs that wanted to stop all this warring on Earth.
And so do you follow the theory that Atlantis slid down to become Antarctica? I slid down from Spain.
I don't know about that. I don't have any data on that, but I do, but this theory anyway that Stuart is saying is that the mountains of eastern United States and western Europe and the Azores and the Canaries are the tall parts of what was Atlantis, and just like Hawaii and California and the Philippines and so forth are the mountains of what was left of Lemuria.
Yeah, there's a book by a guy named Charles Hapgood called Earth Shifting Crust.
Yeah.
Have you heard of it? And the foreword is written by Albert Einstein. And Einstein said this guy, Hapgood, figured out all the problems of geology in the last 100 years, that the Earth's crust can shift very quickly in times of trauma and can slip. And so they were saying in the book, the foreword's written by Albert Einstein, that the Atlantis west of the Straits of Gibraltar in Spain, most of it slipped down to become Antarctica, and now that's melting, and Greenland's melting, but I can't figure out yet what Greenland is, but I think this is what we're going to see in the next decade in Antarctica.
Wow.
You're going to see Atlantis.
Wow, that's going to be fascinating.
But it's going to be up to the indigenous peoples of the earth to rise up and stop this intergalactic war.
Yeah, it's time. They can see a lot now with the LiDAR, which can peel away the to a depth of several miles to see just what indeed is under there. And there's so much traces of civilization. In Yucatan, for example, there were millions of people, not just in the dramatic sites we know of, but there was all kinds of stuff underneath, deeper down.
In the Yucatan?
Yeah. And what you're saying about slippage sounds totally correct to me, that's what's happening. But we know that there's lots of reports from the historical documents I've been dealing with about high civilizations in the caverns of Antarctica.
Well, that's where Hitler went to find. What's that?
Go ahead. You answer that. Go ahead.
I didn't understand what were you saying, Jen? I didn't.
Oh, we had a guest on about a month ago, John YHWH, and he said that the pyramid Giza pyramid is 180 degrees. It's right opposite of the Hawaiian Islands. And he said that these pyramids are strategically located on the opposite side of things like the Hawaiian Islands, where, the volcano, it's a stabilizer, and they're all over the planet. And he charted them. And I didn't get to read the book yet, but he was a fascinating guest. So maybe before, all this stuff was happening, and then the Anunnaki put these pyramids in to try to stabilize the Earth. And he claims it ties in with the moon, too, and the moon is another stabilizer to try to prevent these catastrophes that happen periodically.
Because the Earth was struck, and a third of the crust was struck off the Earth. It's an unstable place, and there are people living here.
Yeah.
And that now it's making a move. The woman at Fatima, who appeared at Fatima, who Barbara Marciniak from the Pleiades Star System channel, said, who's this woman in Fatima in 1917 is predicting the course of 20th century Europe accurately, the end of communism, the coming of the Second World War, the shooting of the Pope, and the end of the Iron Curtain. Who is this person in a free will dimension, the third dimension? Who's this person who can accurately predict as if there's a business plan in place for the planet? And she's warning us what's going on. So there's something in my submission is in Russia. And this is why the Cold War is being fought all over the place there. What that is, I don't know. But I'm trying to relate this information to what might be this Ark of the Covenant that's somewhere in the central part of Canada. There's some kind of a secret history or something.
Isn't Fatima Lady Nimma? Maybe she has time travel capabilities?
That's what I don't say. In my books, I claim that Mary the Magdalene And the sacred marriage that was forbidden for her to marry because she had the child Ninurta out of wedlock with Enlil, they said to heck with that when they were told they couldn't go home. Jerusalem's original name was Ariel. She'll come there dressed as the bride. And so that, of course, is why Jerusalem, the other reason Jerusalem's being fought over so hard, because that's the wedding at Cana, where she left when they were in Egypt, they were known as Set, Isis, Osiris, and Nephthys, the four gods of Sumer. They have different language, but it's the same characters now in Cairo carrying on. So remember that Set and Osiris had a fight because Osiris slept with Set's wife, Nephthys. So in the Nibiru way, Anunnaki, down come the pans, up comes the knives, and they go after the penis. And Set won, and he cut off Osiris's penis. But then Isis, the lover of Osiris, what's that?
I mean, Enki is Set is Enki, right?
Enki is Set, and Osiris the Black, because his name was Blackened for having Ninurta. His name was Black, and Isis, the Black Madonna, her name was Blackened. And so those two are lovers all the way back to Nibiru. But she resurrects Osiris, but then she does something crazy. She leaves with the assassin. Isis and Set took off. She took off out of Cairo. And I think the Phoenicians, the Basques, took them to Greece. And there they became HeZeus, Christos, HeZeus, and Diana, the woman of the tree. Remember, I had this image of this woman from Fatima on my front lawn, the woman of the DNA. And when you see a picture of Zeus and Diana in a book called The Serious Mystery by Robert Temple, at page, I think it's 263, there's this fantastic image of HeZeus with his little atom, his little hominid, and the woman of the tree, the woman of the DNA. And once Greece got going in 500 BC, they came back to Jerusalem.
She took off with them, though, you're saying? You're saying she took off?
She took off with Enki.
Oh, she took off with Enki. I thought you said she took off with Osiris.
Osiris? No, she took off. Osiris was the god lording over Jerusalem as an outpost. It's a little outpost, on the outside of town, outside of Cairo, Memphis. It's just a little town, Jerusalem. And so that was their hinterland. And no, she resurrected Osiris, her lover, the Black, Enlil, and took off with the assassin because Osiris was going crazy, killing people. Uh-huh. Don't forget, Yahweh, killed as Moses was leaving. I mean, he was killing people in front of Moses. He was mowing them down. He was going ahead, a column of light by night and a column of cloud by day. And he was mowing down the farmers ahead of Moses to go into Canaan and kill the giants that came off of Atlantis, the Nephilim.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the Canaanites.
How did they finally get back together, and then they end up getting married at the wedding at Cana? Our tradition, which has Jesus and Mary, which is Enki and Nima, and it has the king and queen, which is probably Anu came down with Antu for the wedding.
What I know is that in my submission, they left from Cairo, and the Phoenician, the Basques, and we're going to go into the Basques. My daughter's going to go in and meet the Basques in the next 6 months and find out what the hell is there going on. But they left and went to Greece in 500 BC. So I have to get the chronology straight. Oh, so they went into Jerusalem first. They became Jesse and Solomon, and Solomon brought the woman of the tree, Asherah, in to tell Yahweh, "Hey, you're not the only God here. Here's the woman who fashioned the first Adam." And with that, Solomon was kicked out. The greatest king of all time was kicked out of Jerusalem, and then they went over to Greece. That's 1000 BC. They went to Greece in 500 BC and established the woman of the tree in Greece. And then at zero, around zero, they came up the River Jordan. They're not born in Jerusalem. The original Gospels of Mark and John have no nativity scene. That was added by the Vatican 300 years later. They came up the River Jordan the way they came up in Mexico. They came up there as Quetzalcoatl or as Kukulkan. They came up in Peru as Lick Titicaca, as Menko Capac and Mama Okla. They came up in China as Fuxi and Nuhua, the fish gods. There are always these fish gods married to the half-sister. It's the craziest story ever. But they're not fish gods. They go through the Stargate. It's a watery, fish-like experience, which many people are experiencing today. But they don't know what the hell's going on in the bedroom. But the reports that I'm getting is there's lots of strange things going on in the bedroom. As this whole thing, Dr. Lessin said, as the energy's speeding up and the cycle's increasing to 3,450 years, time's accelerating, the whole thing's accelerating, and we're going up into other dimensions. Which, as we said before on the show, in my book Sacred Sex and your guys' tantric teachings, that the Knights Templar carried a secret, and the secret, I believe, is the Ormus molecule that the female can produce on the 14th and 28th day of the cycle. And now we're able to lead. The scientists here in Alberta are telling us that the sun could explode the same way that Lyra did.
That's right.
Or a star near Lyra.
That happens. That happens to almost every star by and by.
Well, no, but they're saying it's bye-bye time. I said, no, you can just go to another dimension and come back. If you know how to do it.
That's exactly what A.R. Borden and those guys said they did. They last time there was a real danger to Earth, they transferred us into a different timeline until the danger was past. That's the story that Borden reported.
And what year did he say this happened in?
He said it happened in the other 12/21/12. They did it.
I thought it was 2013.
Second time, yeah.
Well, what they're telling me here.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's a holy number 7. Earth's the 7th planet, and I ask people, how's the Earth the 7th planet when it's third from the sun? And the answer, of course, is they flew in from Pluto. And you count your planets in, and you arrive on the Earth. So this magic number 7 that's all over the Bible, there's a 7-year ripening period from what we thought was 2012 until 2019. And during that ripening period where it's warming up to what's now 2012 now, that's what A.R. Borden was in, is my guess. He was in this lukewarming up a saucepan, kind of heating up thing, where he was able to pick up that vibe.
Mm-hmm. Well, they decided to blink us in and out of time-space, out of harm's way. So apparently, the Nibiru is on its way out, but going out is even more devastating than coming in.
Well, when would it come in?
They say that the disturbances of Nibiru or one of its Lagrange points associated detritus is what caused the eruption of Thera, Stromboli is what we call it now, which sunk the Minoan fleet, which was the last of Nimrud's goddess cultures, and sent the tides rushing back and forth down the Nile and the Red Sea. That Moses and the people with him had to deal with.
Well, Dr. Lessin, this seems to me that this is what I've been saying, that there's a secret from the Minoans, from Crete, that Nefertiti, the wife of Moses, knew, that was passed on to Joan of Arc, passed on to Napoleon, passed on to Saint Teresa of Lisieux. There's a secret in that area of Rennes-le-Château in the central part of France, And when Ben Franklin, by the way, went over to Paris, the guy made a beeline for Rennes-le-Château. And so did Queen Christina of Sweden, which is where René Descartes died. She took off from the throne of Sweden and had to go to Rennes-le-Château on her way to the Vatican. She just abdicated the throne of Sweden, I think in 1650s, and had to go to this crazy church that I visited 5 years ago in that southeastern part of France. This is all very fascinating.
What was it like, Glenn? Did it feel different? What was it like in that church?
Well, not in the church. When we came up the coast, this researcher friend of mine from Sweden, we went up that coast into this the plains there, which I forget the town. Perpignan was the town we went through to get to Carcassonne, which is the medieval city, and then you go south from there. But when you're in that church, what she said was, and she'd never done any work on it, she said, this is Atlantis. All these symbols are from Atlantis. And wow. David Childress, oddly enough, on Ancient Aliens, he's written a book about Rennes-le-Château, and he says it has to do with Atlantis. One, two people I've seen so far, these symbols are from Atlantis. It's as if these pieces of the puzzle are all around the world. Like the world was smashed apart. And now it's time for everybody on the planet to start looking around their backyards and bring these pieces to a common repository of knowledge, which is, by the way, the Great Library of Alexandria. And when it was burned to the ground with all its 60,000 papyrus that were in there, the priest said, we're going to rebuild it over the ocean to the west, where the sun sets, North America, where the eagle is, which I thought was the U.S., but there are more eagles in Ottawa here in Canada than there are anywhere else, and in the land of ON. And our national capital is in Ottawa, ON, Ontario. Of all the 60 states or provinces in North America, there's only one in the land of ON. And so I'm telling people the greatest souls of all time are being born in North America. That was a psychic told me this from India. And they're not being born in Tibet anymore. They're being born in North America with a concentration in Ontario where I'm living. Yeah. So the point is all these stories that we're talking about, it seems to be helter-skelter kind of all over the place, but it's not once you begin to put this map back together that was smashed apart by German, and I don't mean German people, but elements that are there that are distorting the truth, of hiding their tracks, kind of.
Yeah, Enlil's people, the English are pissed off and afraid of, and they knew what was happening, and from the get-go with the Germans taking over.
Some element inside of Germany taking over.
Yeah.
It's the only reason why I can think you're mesmerized by the Queen's family, because Queen Elizabeth doesn't get her lineage from Edward III. The Tudor line's been broken because Edward III's son, Edward IV, was a bastard. And then her line comes out of Germany because the Saxo-Coburg Hanover came from Sophia, which was Queen Anne couldn't have a baby, so it went over to her cousin or whoever the heck she is, the Electress of Hanover, Sophia, and she couldn't have children. And it flips over to another member. There's no lineage here. They're just passing a pot among themselves under Enlil, and then claiming that they're the crown.
That's it.
That whole thing makes no sense. And the people around the world are waking up now. The only way to get peace, in my opinion, is to realize that Enki was HeZeus Christos, and that this whole children of Abraham thing of the Muslims, Christians, and Jews were following Yahweh and Leo, who Jesus in John 8:44, the audience can look it up, John 8:44, Jesus tells the Jews the father of Abraham, Yahweh, was a liar and a murderer from the beginning.
Wow.
He lied to Eve. Wow. He lied to Eve. John, you look it up in the Bible when we get off the radio show. He lied. Yahweh lied to Eve because when Eve had to choose between Yahweh, God, and the devil, who is supposed to be Satan, it's Enki and Enlil are there because the term she's talking to Hanakash, Yahweh and Hanakash. And Hanakash is the adjectival shining. He's a shining being. And the key is that Jesus transfigured on the mountain. He's able to turn his protons into photons and transfigure as he goes into other dimensions. And he's showing us how to do this. This much I've done and more you will do. And that's where we are now. Time's accelerating. We can go off the planet, we can go interdimensional, and come back to avoid this major catastrophe. And we have to go faster and faster and faster with this message if there's imminent danger to the sun.
Whew. Wow. Dynamite.
Whoa. So, and then explain, I guess, the confusion around the virgin birth since we're coming up on Christmas.
What's that?
We're coming up on Christmas, and
yeah.
You've explained this before.
Mithras' birthday.
Yeah, the confusion around the virgin birth. It's really the story of the mind or the
virgin birth. The virgin birth is the creation of Adam and Eve in a test tube, in a petri dish. That's what we're celebrating when they took the egg of an ape, luckily a bonobo ape because they're very sexual, and they put in sperm from planet Nibiru, and that hybrid became Homo sapien. And then, if you look in your Genesis 6:4, the Nephilim had sex with the daughters of man, and so Enki put his sperm of a royal Anunnaki into the daughters of Eve and created Homo sapiens sapiens. And that female is the greatest machine in the known universes, plural. And she's just turning on now as this timelines, as Dr. Lessin has said, as this timeline's accelerating, the female's ability to go into other dimensions is now accelerating. And the male has to follow her instructions. There's no roadmap, guys. This didn't come with an instruction manual. The female knows where she's going. The female knows where she's going, and the male's got to follow her instructions.
Okay, we're coming up in the last 3 minutes. Uh-oh. You still there?
I'm here.
Okay, yeah, we're coming up in the last 3 minutes. What would you like to say, Sasha?
This is the time to talk about your books and your websites and advertise how people can find you and your work.
Well, my books are called The Books of Isis, which is the Black Madonna, not the group in Iraq, and which is about Ninmah, the goddess that came here and changed the ape into human beings and did a lot more, was coming up in the future. The first book is about weight loss. The second book is about your health and what your cells were designed to be fed to have perfect health. And if you don't, I describe in there what happens when you misfeed yourself. Book 3 is about sacred sex, and the postmenopausal woman is the key females on the planet. We call them elders in indigenous language or symbology, but those above age 45 or 50, they're the ones who have this special Ormus molecule knowledge that they're beginning to wake up to, and that's book 3. Book 4 is about the Black Madonna herself and how she fashioned the first Adam. And Book 5 is about many things in Book 5, but primarily about banking and the errors that we've made. And the books are available at authorhouse.com.
Great.
Excellent.
You got a website, probably.
You don't have a website.
I had a website, but I took it down because of various reasons. But it's best just to go to the Author House. You can see the descriptions of the books as they come up. You either Google Glenn Bogue or Books of Isis, and all 5 books will come up. I'm not sure you can buy the 5th one yet. So the greatest miracle of all time is in the fifth book, and that's all I'm going to tell your audience.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Glenn. Awesome show. Thank you.
As usual. Great feedback, guys. Thanks.
Thank you, listeners. Aloha, love, and blessing.